Hello friends, welcome back. This is Rajneesh and this session is about configuration of DHCP server. DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. That is, it assigns IP addresses dynamically to the laptops or the workstations. Okay, let's consider two scenarios in which one is having a server. Server needs to be called by a particular IP address or name, so it should have a static IP address. It should not change over the time. The different scenario could be a scenario of a cafe or a cyber cafe. For example, if we talk about a cyber cafe, there could be hundreds of people going to the cyber cafe, coming out, and could be even more than that. They need to access the internet, so there should be mechanism. So it specifies the IP addresses to those laptops. This can be done by DHCP server. So what actually happens is, here is your laptop in a cyber cafe. As soon as you switch it on, it has some MAC address associated with it, and in case it has been configured to use DHCP IP address, it will broadcast or sends a DHCP request to all the servers in or all the nodes in that network or LAN, and the message will be like, my MAC address is this one, please provide me an IP address, netmask, gateway, DNS server and Win server so that I can coordinate with the environment and I can access the internet and all the machines in this particular infrastructure. So the first thing that happens is, this laptop in the cyber cafe sends DHCP discover to all the nodes in the network. In case we have multiple DHCP servers, all of these DHCP servers will receive the requests, and this request consists of the MAC address of the workstation that is requesting an IP address. So in this scenario, I have installed 3 DHCP server in the same environment, and DHCP discover request is received by all these. Next, what happens is, after the DHCP request has been received, DHCP offer is provided by the DHCP server. It says take the IP address XYZ. For example, we have 3 DHCP servers, so DHCP offer will happen with DHCP2 and DHCP3 also. So it's going to provide the IP address 1.1.1.1. It will provide 2.2.2.2 and it will be 3.3.3.3. And at the same time, these DHCP servers, all 3, will maintain the lease and will note that this particular MAC address has been assigned this IP address for this interval of time. The same lease is maintained on all these 3 DHCP servers. Now, we have received DHCP offer from the 3 DHCP servers, but if we are talking about a laptop, it is going to use a single IP address. So it will prefer the authoritative DHCP server, and in our DNS or DHCP environment, the authoritative server is 192.168.1.205. So it sends, this laptop sends back DHCP request or broadcasts DHCP request to the environment, sending, this is my MAC address and this is the IP address that I agree on. So DHCP request is entertained by the DHCP server that offered this request, because this DHCP request has the MAC address of the workstation, IP address of the workstation, and the IP address of the DHCP server. If we talk about DHCP server 2, it receives the DHCP requests and it comes to know that this request or the IP address this client is using was not provided by this DHCP server, so it cleans up its lease so that this IP address that was offered to workstation or laptop, this one, could now be given to some other laptop or workstation. The same happens here. The lease is cleaned up and the IP address is now in free pool that can be assigned to some other workstation. Now the other two DHCP servers have freed up their leases, so they are free, and this DHCP server sends back an acknowledgement or DHCP ACK specifying the other details also. So now this workstation will be having an IP address, its netmask, its default gateway, DNS server, when's lease duration, and in case this laptop has to boot from PXE, it could be a file. I'll show you a demo of it, but it'll take time. And at the same time, this DHCP server updates its lease for the duration for which the lease has been assigned to this workstation. This lease file will consist of its MAC address and its IP address and domain system and all the details for the client. So let's come on to the lab now. Okay, let me close them down. Test VM has been shut down. Okay, so let's switch it on. This is my test machine. Okay, let me clean up the files from it. Okay, so first thing I need to do is to install a DHCP server on this infra server. So what I do is yum install DHCP. Now the thing that I will be required is the configuration file corresponding to it. So I move to /etc dhcp dhcpd.conf. I see it is blank. rpm -ql dhcp grep -color, so it will display in colors dhcpd.conf. So here I can see that a sample dhcpd.conf was provided by the DHCP package, so I just make use of it. Preserve permissions /etc dhcpd.conf, so I replace it. Now let's move to the configuration /etc dhcp dhcpd.conf. These are the global variables that apply to all the subnets that we'll be creating. So let's modify them. What is our domain? It will be labs.local. I'll show you the other session also. Okay, here is one more session. So my domain is labs.local, and the name servers, let me see the name server. So yes, this is my name server, 192.168.1.205, or you can specify the name. Default lease time, this is in seconds, so it comes out to be around 10 minutes, and this comes out to be around 2 hours. Sorry, 7200. That comes out to be 2 hours, 3600 into 2. Okay, log facility where it has to log authoritative. Yes, this is authoritative to my network. Let's comment it. And let's use this section. This seems to have almost all the variables. So my network is 192.168.1.0 and net mask will be 255.255.255.0. We'll have a separate networking concept to explain the networking. Range. This is the range from which the IP addresses will be allocated. 192.168.1 dot let's make it from 220 192.168.1.230. So it is going to assign the IP addresses from this pool. Option name servers, domain name servers, it's going to be labs.local. Domain name will be labs.local. Routers means the default gateway where the traffic has to flow. So in our environment, the traffic has to flow through 192.168.1.1. You may have a different IP address for this router. Broadcast address is going to be 192.168.1.255. So whenever I am pinging or sending a packet to this one, this packet will be received by every device in the network. Default lease time right now it's 10 minutes and the maximum is 2 hours. If we talk about the cyber cafe, this is fine because the users may be accessing it for a small interval of time and after that they leave. But if we talk about a big infrastructure or a big office, we may have the stations that are sitting at the same place, or we may have a same set of employees that are coming to the office. So we can increase the lease time to 1 day or even more than 1 week. If you want, you can modify it. So let's keep it default as 1 hour and max lease time as 2 hours. That's fine. This section says in case the Ethernet address is this one, assign it, okay, ask it to download the file this one from this server. Server name corresponds to TFTP. We'll have a separate section for it. And let's comment these lines. We only need one section as of now. From 84 to 104, substitute starting with hash, and it has commented these lines. And right now let's not talk about the fixed address. And I restart DHCP service and chkconfig DHCPD on so that it remains persistent even after the reboot. I would like to show you the configuration file once again. Starting with $delete. So it'll remove all the commented lines. So the log facility, this is authoritative, and we come on to this section subnet 192.168.1.0. the range of IP addresses it will be providing is 220 to 230. This is the DNS server. Let's have a look into the logs now. dot leases var log messages. Now let's open up a client. This is my client, username, password. Right now I can see that it has the IP address 192.168.1.208, etc sysconfig network scripts if cfg eth0. I can see that this IP address has been statically assigned to it because boot proto is none. I just change it to DHCP. Now it will try to fetch the IP address from the DHCP server, and I can comment it IP address netmask gateway. I can comment them. I just restart networking. Now here you can see it. It received a DHCP request for a particular IP address from this MAC address on interface bone 0. Okay, DHCP request for this IP address 192.168.1.218 from this MAC address B881. If we want to see the MAC address, if config, it ends with 8B81. That's fine. Interface bone 0. So first thing, it receives its DHCP request. As soon as it receives a DHCP request, it does an offer for a particular IP address and updates dhcp.leases file. So here it says lease 192.168.1.220. Okay, so here is DHCP discover from this one, and here it says offer, which is .220. So it updates the file with lease 220, which starts at 1720 and ends at 1820. So this lease has been provided for 3600 seconds or 1 hour. I'll show you. .conf, and we come to the section corresponding to 192.168.1.0, and here you can see default lease time is 1 hour, 3600. Okay, coming back to it, the lease is prepared, binding state, it is now active, and after the lease has expired it will become free. Hardware Ethernet associated with it. So it offers this to the test VM. Test VM replies to all the network equipments that yes, I agree on the DHCP request 220. And finally DHCP server sends an acknowledgement that yes, this has been assigned to you. And if you talk about the other DHCP servers, as soon as they get the DHCP request and they get to know that this has been provided by a different DHCP server, they'll just free up their leases. So this is how the DHCP server works. Right now we can see that the lease that has been provided to it is .220. Now there could be a scenario when we want to assign a static IP address to a particular machine. For example, for test VM I want to assign it an IP address 208. So let me assign that. Okay, it's already opened. I come here and here I'll see one section. I can just replace the same. Host test VM, test VM, hardware Ethernet we can just copy from here. and the fixed address name corresponding to the machine. Let's name it test vm dot labs dot local. As we are assigning it a name, we need to do a forward and a reverse lookup for the same also. I just save it DHCPD restart and where named chroot. The second part I am doing is modifying the DNS entry where named dot labs. So I just increase the serial number by 1 and add an entry test VM IP address 208 write and quit. The reverse lookup, update the serial number, add an entry 208 will be the IP address, PTR records stand for reverse lookup, and the name is test VM, and I reload the named. Let's try to resolve it. Test vm dot labs dot local. It works fine, and let's try to do the reverse lookup. Okay, both the resolutions are working fine. DHCP server, I think I have already restarted. And I have statically assigned it the IP address. I have statically assigned or bind this MAC address to a particular IP. Let me see the logs now. Var log messages and var log var lib dhcpd dot leases. Now let me start the networking from the client end. Oh, sorry. Okay, now you see the difference. It received a DHCP request for 220. Why? Because it already had an IP address 220, and the DHCP server also knows that 220 was assigned to it. Now the DHCP server says, instead of DHCP ACK, it says DHCP NAK, means you are not allowed to use this IP address. Rather, I have a fixed IP address available for you. So it says no ACK on 220, and so again it receives the DHCP discover because the previous IP was not allowed. Right now it does a DHCP offer on 208 because I statically assigned to it, and now the DHCP client or this test VM says yes, it looks good to me, and sends DHCP request to it for 192.168.1.208, and DHCP server receives the request for 208 and says it looks good to me also, and sends a DHCP ACK to it. And finally this test machine now has the IP address 192.168.1.208, which is statically assigned to it. Okay, one more thing that you can see right now is it has not updated the leases file varlib dhcpd.leases. The reason being dhcpd.leases. So here you can see that here is the thing, I restarted DHCP server and you cannot see lease for it. Let me do tail minus few lines, maybe 20 lines. So after the restart, it didn't update it. Previously, the IP address assigned to it was 220. Right now, the IP address assigned is 208. Lease file is not updated for the static IP addresses because DHCP server already knows that this machine has to be assigned a static IP address. Got it? Okay. So this is the generic DHCP server environment, or the generic DHCP server setup for our environment. We'll continue updating it as soon as there is a requirement corresponding to a video. I would like to recall, first of all, what I did is I marked it as authoritative, log facility is default, and secondly I have to specify a subnet. Subnet range means the IP addresses will be allocated from this particular network only. If we talk about 208, that's outside the network, but yes, that has been statically assigned. So okay, from the client end I confirm that I received the IP address. Let me confirm whether I got the DNS servers. Yes, I got the domain labs.local. I got the name server 1.205, and if I want to see the lease details that I received, var lib dh client, this is corresponding to the client dh client eth0.leases, and here you can see it received a lease on interface eth0 with a fixed IP address 208. Netmask is C class that we specified here. Let me try to compare these two things. So netmask is here. DHCP lease time is the default lease time. I set it to 1 hour. DHCP message type 5. DHCP name servers, this is ns.labs.local, that was converted to IP 192.168.1.205. DHCP server identifier means which is the DHCP server. It's infra server, which has the IP address 192.168.1.205. Broadcast address, domain name, and the lease. Okay, so that's all for a generic DHCP client setup. Thanks for viewing the video. Have a good day.